Hello, a very good evening and welcome to the last cross question of the week. It's Wednesday, it's 1 minute past 8. Let me tell you who's on our panel tonight. We have Greer to my left, playwright and author, who's a columnist for the New European newspaper. Kate Andrews to my right, economics editor of The Spectator. Chris Bryant, I wouldn't say far left, but I'd be lying. He is Labour MP
and you
for
wouldn't
Rhondda,
lie, would you?
And chair of the
And you
Commons
can't say
Committee.
Rhondda. You still can't
I
say
know
Rhondda.
I can't say it. Do
It's
you
a
have
double
to keep
D.
pointing that out?
Yes.
I can't do my R's properly. I'm a bit like Roy Jenkins. And Bob Seeley, who is Conservative MP for the easily pronounced Isle of Wight. Welcome to you all. 0345 6060 973. We've already got one troublemaker on the panel. Let's see how the others compete with Chris Bryant. And you can text 84850 or send a question to us via Alexa. Just say send a comment to LBC. And you can watch us on Global Player.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
It's time for a question from Simon in Southampton. When isn't it a time for a question from Simon in Southampton? Simon, go ahead.
Can I just say good evening to Chris as well, please, because I'm a bit of a fan, and if everybody in Parliament had that man's integrity, then this country would be a fantastic place to live. So thank you, Chris, and keep it up.
Even he's laughing at that one, Simon.
Yeah.
That's very kind of you. Thank you, Simon.
No problem. My question is this, in a similar vein, really. Is Donald Trump now finished?
Is Donald Trump finished? Well, of course, we have brilliant producers on this programme who booked two Americans to come on the panel on the day after the midterms. Kate Andrews, let's start with you.
I hope so, Simon. That doesn't mean he is, though. It's not clear that Donald Trump thinks that the past 18 hours have been a loss for the Republican Party. I would argue they have been. Inflation's at a 40-year high in the US, as it is in the UK. The Democrats have not done a very good job in addressing that, even talking about it, admitting it. This should have been a sweep for the GOP, and it looks like they will just take the House. I mean, there was talk of taking 40 seats. It looks like at the moment, I think they're at net 6 seats, and they could very well lose the Senate. We are somehow back in a 2020 world where we're actually going to almost certainly going to a Georgia runoff to determine the Senate. All of this should point to Donald Trump.
Just explain that. What does a Georgia runoff mean?
Sure. So in 2020, the Senate was decided because in the state of Georgia, if you don't get 50% plus one of the vote, you go to that runoff, and it's so tight in Georgia.
Over the top two candidates.
Neither of the top two candidates have crossed the 50% mark, so it's going to go to a runoff in 4 weeks' time. And that one seat, it looks like, again, will decide the state of the U.S. Senate. All of this should be indication to Donald Trump that it's time to move on. Some of his candidates did well. Most of them in the really important key states that he heavily endorsed did badly. Unfortunately, the narcissism of Donald Trump may well decide that he still wants to push this, wants to try his luck in the primary with the Republican base. I'm not confident enough to say that Donald Trump is finished, but it was no doubt a bad night for him. Perhaps the worst night he's had since he actually lost the election himself in 2020.
Oh, but he didn't lose the election.
Oh, famously. Yeah, famously.
But if he runs again, does he almost automatically become the candidate, or are there serious contenders that might defeat him?
There was... Last night, we saw Ron DeSantis in Florida, who just edged his governor race in Florida in 2018, who just stormed it. And, this morning, Republicans woke up and, he was the face on the front page of the papers, because what was actually quite a bad night, given where people thought the Republican Party was going to go, Ron DeSantis did well. I think before the midterms, the assumption was if Donald Trump runs, Donald Trump wins. The real question will be, do the Ron DeSantises of the world have the gumption to go up against Donald Trump? He is already threatening out on his campaign trail, even though he hasn't announced yet, to reveal things. It's going to get ugly. It's going to get gritty if you run against Donald Trump. But Ron DeSantis has proven that you don't need to be Donald Trump to do well for the Republican Party. In fact, I think it's becoming more obvious that Donald Trump on any kind of ticket with an endorsement or actually being himself is a drag on the Republican Party.
Greer, what's your interpretation of the results that we've seen so far?
Okay, first of all, I can't hear anything, so I should tell you that. And secondly, well, first of all, this is the way tonight was supposed to look. Tonight was supposed to look like a red wave. This was supposed to be a rout. This is what technically happens at every midterm. The phenomenon known as the president's party loses, because this is a referendum on the president. So when people are angry at the president, they take it out on his party. This has not happened. Number two...
Why?
Well, one of the reasons is because independence broke for the Democrats. They can't stand Donald Trump. So he is kryptonite as far as those people are concerned. So they broke for the Democrats. Also, Generation Z is Dem plus 28, which is really a shock. They came right out and voted for him, for Biden. So you've got these two demographics. And also the other phenomenon, Biden's approval rating went down tonight. They still voted for his party anyway. Mm-hmm. People are overlooking all of that, A, because they're sick and tired of Donald Trump, and B, Biden said to the American people, this is about democracy. And the American people came out and they voted. And this is what they voted. But it was the independents who did it. And also the Biden coalition held together. The 2020 Biden coalition of the demographic known as white suburban women with college educations, they came out, African-American women came out, and reproductive rights was on the ballot. People said it wasn't going to be on there. It was on it. So all of this came together. This is a highly unusual midterm. No one's ever seen anything like it. And it's a credit to the Democrats. This is a massive night for them.
Because if you go back and thinking when Clinton was president in 1994, the midterms, then Newt Gingrich was effectively the leader of the Republican Party, and they got a massive result. Similarly, in 2010, first 2 years of Obama. So this is quite something, Bob Seeley, isn't it?
It is. I'm just wondering on that point. Okay, I agree with Kate. I hope it is the end of Trump, but I think Trump is a fighter, and I would.
So we're now going to get complaints that we have an anti-Trump panel.
No, but I wouldn't write him. Okay, I don't like Trump because I don't think he's a good human being, and I don't trust him on Russia. I think it was a good night for DeSantis, and I think, as Kate is right, you've now got in DeSantis somebody who's able to potentially challenge Trump successfully, and the Trump candidates and Trump himself look like they're now damaged goods, and people think we need to move on from that. However, I just wonder if this is actually bizarrely, this midterms may not be a comment so much on Biden, but a comment also on the Trump candidates, that non-Trump candidates like DeSantis have done much better than Trump candidates.
Yes.
So this is a message. I think the reproductive rights, I'm sure, was out there. I'm sure that's part of it.
It definitely was. Absolutely. It wasn't any sure. It was for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. But also, this was a comment by some moderate Republicans on the fact they didn't like some of the Republican candidates.
It was the independents.
I think that's a big message.
Don't leave the independents out. The independents voted for the Democrats. They didn't know what they were going to do.
But that's a key thing, Chris Bryant, isn't it? Because successful political parties reach out beyond their bases, and that's what the Republicans aren't doing at the moment. They may be energised by Donald Trump, a lot of them, but you can't win a national election just by appealing to your base.
My own party has been through this process.
I wasn't going to say
yes, I'm fully aware of that. I think there was another bit, which was that just running culture wars isn't going to get you elected, even though that can motivate your base. And oddly enough, then Roe v. Wade sort of backfired electorally.
I think he might have done, for sure.
The question was, is he toast? And I've used this image before. I used it earlier on this year about two prime ministers now. But, in hotels, they have that toasting machine where you have to put the bread in, and it never really does it properly the first time. So you have to do it twice and 3 times and 4 times. So he's probably on the second way through the hotel toasting machine. We may have to go through another couple of processes.
I hope not.
Can I just say something about Ron DeSantis and push back a little bit on what Kate said? Ron DeSantis ran...
He's the governor of Florida.
In the state that he's actually fixed. And if you look at the way he's handled voting rights, what he's done in terms of gerrymandering districts, how he has corralled...
That's never happened before.
Well, this is Florida. Okay,
you come from Chicago.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, well, I do know. That's why I'm saying it. That's why I'm telling you what's going down.
And it may have worked in Nevada for the Democrats quite successfully.
Well, but that's why I'm saying what's going down. We call in Chicago the fix. Don't weigh DeSantis outside of Florida. We don't know what's going to happen.
I agree. I think he's obviously done phenomenally well. When you look at him on any issue other than Florida, he looks remarkably weak.
Well, look, I wasn't endorsing DeSantis by any means. He's not he wouldn't necessarily be my pick. However, I think that we have to look at the trend that DeSantis represents, because the state that interests me most, not simply because we're going to that Senate runoff, but because of the breakdown is Georgia. Look at what happened in Georgia. You had incumbent governor Brian Kemp, who was in a heated race with Stacey Abrams, because as far as the two of them were concerned, that was a rematch from 2018 when she felt that it was not a fair outcome, she said, due to voter suppression. He won early in the night comfortably by about 6 or 7 percentage points, no question. Now look at the Senate race, where Donald Trump's radical election-denying candidate, Herschel Walker, is going to a runoff and is actually behind the Democrat by, barely less than a half a percentage point. Yes, exactly. Now,
so, Kate, you're saying if the Republicans want to win the next election, they need to distance themselves from Trump.
Well, it's a really good example of thoughtful Georgian voters coming out and saying, I'm going to vote differently, I'm going to split my ticket, I'm going to pick the best person for the best job. And you can imagine a scenario with a more moderate Senate candidate where they were swept up in the coattails of Kemp, and that did not happen.
What happened in Georgia, remember, Brian Kemp bought some good wishes cookies from the Democrats because Trump dumped on him. Remember during the election campaign, Trump took out the attorney general. He tried to get the vote recounted. Remember the telephone call that they did?
But this is the point. The moderate Republican, didn't sweep, but had a very comfortable win. The Trump candidate is now going to a runoff. And I think that the Kemp, DeSantis, they're different people. They represent different views and different principles.
But Stacey
ultimately, keeping Trump out of your campaign does well for you.
Stacey Abrams, only a few weeks ago, had a pretty significant poll lead, and I think there was quite a lot of confidence that she was going to win that, and then didn't. So I think you've also got to look at what the dynamic of what has happened in the campaigns themselves, it certainly looks as if, on the whole, if there was a Trump-endorsed candidate and an election denier, a truth denier, then they had a bad night last night, and that, thank God. And I completely agree with Bob. It's a great thing,
Chris.
I completely, and I also agree about the Russia point, because my biggest anxiety was that Zelensky would have a bad night out of last night, and I don't think he did. I think he had a good night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wait a minute. The bad part of this whole thing is if there isn't a sweep, as traditionally is supposed to happen. Kevin McCarthy's in big trouble. Biggie trouble. Kevin McCarthy is the now leader of the Republican minority until they've decided that it is the majority. Kevin McCarthy's in big trouble. He was supposed to deliver a wave. He did not do that. Therefore, the Freedom Caucus and other fanatics in that caucus, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jim Jordan, these people are going to come for his head. Now, if he's got to stand for election, he's not automatically the speaker.
And he was talking about getting 60.
Yes, he did.
Votes, didn't he, just a few weeks ago?
Big trouble.
This all comes down to the original question: is Donald Trump finished? And I actually think, in different ways, we're all kind of suggesting he's not, because he lingers, right? Whether he's running in the primary next time round, even if he's not, and he's going to try to play kingmaker behind the scenes, he lingers, and he's not done.
I wouldn't be all that surprised if he doesn't announce on Tuesday.
It's a bad night for him.
He has to do it. He has to do it.
He won't be announcing
Trump has to do it. He never loses.
Bonnie, why?
He never loses.
He did.
No. Not in his world, he hasn't. Oh, no.
Chris says, Iain, listening to you, I wonder if the Yanks, are we allowed to say that?
Who are they?
Absolutely.
Saw the Boris spell break here and thought,
Pardon? No. What was that question?
It wasn't a question, it's a comment.
What was
that? Saying, I wonder if the Yanks saw the Boris spell break here and thought,
No.
My parents are from the South. I don't know what Yanks he's talking about.
He's talking about me.
Right, you.
We'll come to another question in just a moment. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 19 minutes past 8 on LBC. Bonnie Greer, Kate Andrews, Chris Bryant and Bob Seeley answering your questions. 0345 6060 973. Let's go to Malcolm in Bodmin. Hello, Malcolm.
Evening, Ian. Evening, panel. Ian, fantastic panel tonight. A couple of brilliant libs and a couple who are starting to see the error of their ways, I think. Ian, does the panel agree with me that the 20s are already proving that we're seeing the demise of the populist, also a culture, war, fighting right, and that we're going to see an awful lot more of people like the Dems in America, Labour here, dare I say it, Macron in France, winning out, and people and the world becoming a much better, safer, happier place, hopefully.
So just to sum that up, essentially you're asking, are we going to see a lot more left-wing victories in the years ahead? I'm not sure you could describe the midterms as a victory in raw terms for the Democrats, but I can... It symbolically it was, I guess you could say. Now, Chris Bryant, you're obviously going to say there's going to be a lot more left-wing victories. I mean, you look at Brazil, I suppose.
I was about to say Brazil, yeah. I mean, I'm delighted that Bolsonaro's gone, not least because the lungs of the world are in Brazil, and if it all gets chopped down, then all our other efforts on climate change are going to be for naught. Well, sort of. I hope that that's what's happening. However, I would just point to some worrying trends in Italy. We have a self-confessed fascist prime minister in Italy. I know she's trying to sort of tack a bit at the moment, but nonetheless...
Her advantage is she doesn't look like one, I suppose.
Yes, I don't know what... Yeah, I think she does, actually. But anyway, and I'm not going to go into it. But the far bigger problem is, of course, that the two countries that are the biggest threat to all of us haven't changed at all, and Russia and China. And I think it's great. It looks like Kherson has now fallen and will be taken by Ukraine. But still, Russia and China are the forces for the biggest danger in the world, I think.
Bob Seeley.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most shocking or the most outrageous populist we've ever had in this country, if you define that by trying to drive obsessively and shallowly for a media agenda and foreign wars and foreign adventures, the most shocking populist that we've ever had in this country was Tony Blair. But let's move on from that. I don't think one can
I just lodge my disagreement?
I'm sure you would, Chris. And by the way, I completely agree with what Simon rang in earlier. I think you're a fantastic presence in Parliament, and many people on all sides of the House admire you. So I will sort of add that bit as well. No, look, I don't think we can see too much of what's happening in the midterms in the United States. I do think politics is going to get pretty serious again. We've got a settled leadership in the Conservative Party, and I think now there are a series of really hard, difficult policy choices on the energy, on cost of living, on inflation, on the war in Ukraine, on climate change, on our relationship with China. And I think politics is going to return with a vengeance. But I, as a Conservative member of Parliament, I absolutely welcome that, because I think a Rishi-led government is going to compare very well to a potential Keir-led government. And I think in the next year or two, people would decide that they're unhappy with a lot of things that are happening in the world, some of which are beyond our control, but we are trying to fix them. And I think people are going to think they'd rather be sticking with us than changing when they see the alternatives.
That's a very exciting election message. Stick with nurse for fear of worse.
No, Hello Belloc wasn't that. No, it's actually better than that. I think that we've got the competence to deal with these issues, and I don't think, with great respect to the Labour Party and a few good exceptions like Chris aside, I don't think Keir Starmer's Labour team has. So I'm actually really confident about the future, and I think everything's to play for. But I think we're going to live in a much more serious world.
Can recover its reputation for economic competence within the next 2 years.
Yes.
And you think you can reverse the 30-point poll deficit?
Yeah, because we're already doing so.
Okay, Bonnie?
For sure.
Oh, well, my column in the New European this week is about the rise.
Sorry, I've already plugged it twice.
I'm
going
to say it, so I can do it again. It's about the rise of the populist right. That's what's driving the politics now. I mean, you mentioned Giorgia Meloni. We need to also look at what's happening partially in this country. There's no accident that the Home Secretary used the word invasion on the floor of the House of Commons to talk about migrants. It was a dog whistle. So we are now looking at...
It was a bugle, wasn't it?
It was a dog whistle in that sense. So we're looking at politics in which people are looking to strong men and strong women. They want people to actually make their lives better. And I'm not sure that people are very connected with elections as we understand it, which is one reason why tonight with the Democrats is an important victory, because Joe Biden said democracy is on the ballot, and people came out and they voted. And so far, they're voting for democracy, and that's one of the reasons the Republicans are not.
Do we know what the turnout was? Because it's notoriously low in these elections.
It was good. It was high.
Okay.
And especially with Generation Z, which is the great miracle.
Kate.
It does look like having abortion on a lot of these ballots as basically a referendum anecdotally has turned out a lot more people, as you might expect. It looks like we're going into global recession. Many countries are already experiencing recession. My suspicion is that the parties in charge are going to have to answer for that, and different parties are in charge across the West. I think it's going to be a really difficult time for the Conservative Party, having to oversee economic contraction after economic contraction. I also think that's going to be really hard for Joe Biden. And I think that where there's going to be aim and disproportionate political punishment will be with who's been in charge. And that's going to be what parties have to get a grip on. So I'm not convinced that we are going to see a left-wing slide. I think we're going to see pushback against those who are currently in charge, or at least a big request for answers. But I think there's something else going on here, too. COVID fundamentally changed a lot of people's relationship with the state. And I think that people want more interventionism at the moment. It terrifies me, but I think that is being called for. And I think you're going to see more intervention and more big state, but it's not obvious to me that's only going to come from the left. We're already seeing it from the right in the UK, in the US, elsewhere, and I think that trend's going to continue for a while.
That's a really interesting point, and but I think there's a slightly different way of seeing it, which is, my version would be, I think what COVID said to everybody is we're either all in this together or we're not.
It turned out we weren't, because number 10 was partying.
Indeed,
yeah.
and that was one of the things that undid that.
You're never all in it together. There's always a party elite that does well out of that system.
No, well, quite, but that's slightly my point, but because I think most people in the country feel that we should all be in it together. And especially if we're going to face a big recession, and people say, well, hang on, why is it the chief executives in FTSE 200 companies are getting 28% pay rises this year and nurses can't get 5%?
Well, I'm glad you brought up pandemics, because historically pandemics have always been big harbingers of change. Sometimes we know about the change in the moment. Sometimes it takes a long time. And one of the things I agree with Kate is that people are going to want a more interventionist government, either from the right or from the left. They're going to want more personal contact from the people who are at the top. They want to be able to talk to them. The younger you are, the more you expect to be able to talk about that. And that's why I say we're in danger of a populist right. Why Giorgia Meloni came, the brothers of Italy, basically a neo-fascist party, is in charge because, and Marine Le Pen got more votes than she ever did. This is the direction that the world is going. It's not going left.
But in terms
Well,
of what you just said there, Chris, I mean, this means that next Thursday's budget or autumn statement, whatever we're calling it, is absolutely crucial, because if the impression is given that we're not all in this together and that a lot of the measures are not really... I was going to use the word attack, maybe that's the wrong word, but attacking the right people, so to speak, I think that's going to be a crucial political point in our current history, because it could lose the Tories the next election if they get it wrong.
I mean, they may already have done. I'm not complacent at all, because I've seen, it feels as if politics moves quite quickly, faster than it used to. It goes through a news cycle much faster, and it may be that there's much greater volatility about voting intentions. But on the doorstep, anecdotally, my experience recently has been such anger at the government, and they've been in charge for 12 years. So if we are broke, and the asylum system is broken, and the passport system is broken, and the railways aren't working, and nurses are on strike, whose fault is that?
Okay, can I take issue with a couple of things that have been said, because I don't quite agree. Bonnie, I don't think we're looking for strong people, and I don't think the idea that Rishi is some tough guy populist.
I never said that.
But let me answer the point. You say that globally we're looking for strong people. No, I think in this country, at any rate, we look for competent people, and that's why Rishi is already performing better than Keir.
What do you think Boris was supposed to be?
Oh, that's nonsense.
No, that's
Okay, I think we're looking for competent people, and I think Rishi's highly competent. Secondly, you're talking about a big state. I get the fact that you like the idea of a big state, but actually we've had a big state for the last few years. 400 billion.
What I like.
No, let him finish.
I mean,
there's 400 billion spent on COVID and tens of billions more on energy. So we are already embracing and looking after people. And the idea that that is the domain, I'm not saying necessarily people are saying that, but the idea that that's the domain of the left is simply not true, because we've set up some of the most ambitious programs to make sure people were taken care of, and we've continued to do them.
Wasteful.
Exactly.
Test and trace.
I mean,
let him finish his point.
You can't get everything right, and if it had worked, you would have been praising it, but it didn't work. But we were right to try it.
Wasted.
We were right to try it. We are one of the few countries in Europe that doesn't have an extremist party, in part, I think, because we left the European Union. And many of these parties, like the fascist in Italy, the hard right in France, these are people, and the hard left in Germany, these are people being pushed to the fringes of politics because they see the same old from their leaders.
Well, and they get representation,
and finally,
because of proportional representation.
Right,
Finally,
like you, I was out canvassing. I was out in Brighton and Shawfleet in my patch in the West Wight last weekend, and I'm afraid to say I didn't get that. What I got is that people knew we were in tough times, for the most part was aware that these were global trends and that we were trying to deal with them as best as possible, and actually I got a lot of optimism about what was happening.
Bonnie, briefly.
Okay, listen, don't take me down any kind of road that you're inventing, because I don't know what you're talking about. What I said is that the West is looking at strong men and strong women. I'm not talking about Benito Mussolini. They're looking to individuals to help them get to another level. Boris Johnson won the election, and he had the Tory party attached to him. That's what happened. And then suddenly he was out. So people voted for Brexit because one of the reasons is Boris sold it to them. People like Boris. Americans like Boris. They all like Boris. So you can put that in a strong man.
They don't here now.
Well, let's put it this way.
Don't.
Well, hang on. But you can put that in the strong man category. And that's
all right, I need to go to the news in a second, but a point of information, the turnout in the US midterms was just under 50%. That's the second highest for a midterm election in 50 years. Do you know when the previous highest was? 2018. So
things are getting better.
This is the 2018 coalition.
Yeah. Right, we'll take more of your questions, not on the US midterms in the next half an hour. It's 8:32. News headlines with Josh Bancroft.
Hertfordshire police have admitted it was wrong to arrest LBC reporter Charlotte Lynch yesterday. Officers detained her on a footbridge over the M25 where a Just Stop Oil protest was taking place. The government say they're disappointed that nurses have voted to strike. Hundreds of thousands are planning to stage the largest walkout in over 100 years. And there's going to be a limited service on the tube tomorrow because of strikes. Commuters are being advised to plan ahead. LBC weather, rain for much of Scotland tonight as well as parts of the north and west. Dry and clear in the south and east, lows of 9. Breezy in the far northwest tomorrow. Rain for northwest Scotland, but drier elsewhere and feeling mild. Highs of 16.
This is LBC.
questions.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36. Bonnie Greer, Kate Andrews, Chris Bryant and Bob Seeley with us answering your questions. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to them. And don't forget, watch us on Global Player. Stephen is in East Grinstead. I went out for a meal in East Grinstead 2 Fridays ago. I don't know why I just said that, but I did. Stephen, what would you like to ask?
That's great. Thanks for coming. My question is, did Hertfordshire Police dislocate or break their long arm of the law when arresting and then detaining journalists for reporting on the M25 protests? Thanks.
And this, of course, is the story that's leading our news bulletins. LBC's reporter Charlotte Lynch was arrested yesterday. She showed her press card. They knew exactly who she was. She was handcuffed. She was kept in a cell for 5 hours before being released. And it's caused quite stooshy today. It's been raised in the House of Lords. It's been raised as a point of order in the House of Commons. Chris Bryant.
Yeah, it's appalling. The police shouldn't have been doing it. They shouldn't have. I mean, it's the kind of thing.
Why do you think they did, though?
Yeah.
Who only knows? I mean, I confess that I think that one of the things that's happened over the last maybe a decade is that a lot of senior police officers who'd been in the force for a long time took early retirement because, you know, the government cut during the austerity period under Osborne and that. They cut 20,000 police officers. Actually, it was 45,000 senior police officers left the force during that period. And now they're having difficulty recruiting people. And I think some of the decisions they're making are just completely wacky and off-beam. I can't think, this is the kind of thing you expect to see in, well, either Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, China, whatever. Not the kind of thing you expect in the free country.
Kate.
Chris makes a very good point that when you pledge to recruit 20,000 additional police officers, you can't just recruit anyone. I mean, and you can't just throw them in either. You have to be very cautious about that process. The whole thing seems appalling, Iain, and even the most generous interpretation or idea of what could have been going through their heads just simply isn't good enough. It would not have been hard to take her press card, which she presented, and do a 5-minute phone call to figure out who she was. It feels like a power trip. It feels completely inappropriate. It feels like an attempt to scare your reporter who was doing her job and ended up being extremely brave on the day, much more so than I think she probably expected.
I haven't spoken to Charlotte, but from what I can gather, they seem to sort of have a problem with the fact that she was there. And how did she know that the protesters were going to be there? To which I would say she was doing her job as a journalist. Why didn't you know that they were going to be there? Because apparently, I think they put it on their website.
It's like some strange form of punishment for being better at her job than they were being on the day. I hope there's a full inquiry because it is completely inappropriate behaviour. Residents and citizens who obey the law should be left alone. If there's any question, it should be dealt with good faith and with thoughtfulness. That was not shown to your reporter. Just appalling.
Bob Seeley.
I tend to agree with what everyone else is saying. I think that I'm sorry that Charlotte got arrested, and she shouldn't have been arrested, clearly. I do think in the last few years we've had a slight politicisation of our police, and I'm wondering if this is part of that. There's a lack of respect for journalists. There's people being arrested for these sort of, what are they called, non-criminal hate thoughts or non-criminal hate fines and all that sort of thing. So you've got the police, whether they like it or not, sort of somewhat wading into areas that they shouldn't be wading into. The police should be nicking criminals, not journalists or not people with opinions that may be out of step with others. So I do think in general the police should remember what their role is, but also politicians should remember what the police role is and enable the police to do their job properly, but clearly having boundaries that you don't nick journalists and you don't arrest people unless they're committing crimes. And I also
hate crime is a crime.
No, I'm not talking about hate crimes. I'm talking there is a category of what is it sort of what is the terminology that I'm looking for? It's a legal opinion, but it's something but other people don't like. So it's a non-criminal hate offence or something. And there have been a number of these sort of
hurty remark.
Yeah, and sorry, I mean, I'm sorry.
But the number of hate crimes has gone up dramatically in the last 3-4 years.
No, I'm not talking about hate. No, sorry, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that in a free society,
non-crime hate incidents.
Yeah, non-crime hate incidents. In a free society, you're going to offend some people by your opinions. That is the nature of a free society. And there are some people in our society who say, your opinions scare me, so I'm going to try to silence you. That is not acceptable in a free society.
What should I have done about my email this morning that I got, which just said, you're dead?
Probably the same that I do when I get the same emails, and probably the same that I do when I got somebody who said, here are the knives I'm going to kill you with, and the police turned up and said, well, we'd like to arrest him and charge him, but unfortunately he'll be in a mental institution, but the good news is he's out in 2 weeks. I got on with my life in the hope that I don't get stabbed.
But I mean, that's an appalling thing, isn't it?
Two of our colleagues have been murdered in the last few years, and another has been stabbed, Stephen Timms, and another has been, threatened by what seemed like effectively a terrorist campaign from the hard right against Rosie Cooper. I think the police do have to deal with hate as well.
But I mean, that incident they should have dealt with. I mean,
that's inciting violence. That's a crime.
They did their best, but they said because this person is mentally ill, we can't arrest them for anything. Okay.
Can we go back to the original question, which and I think is most serious, that this journalist was arrested and then held for 5 hours. The 5 hours part is bizarre. Now, being a playwright, I have to ask this question because at first it came to me right away. What happens sometimes with these kinds of protests, there are also sort of actors involved in them as well. And I don't mean professional actors. I mean people acting out roles and so forth. If she looked like them, as far as the police were concerned, to take her would have been a rational thing. To keep her 5 hours is the irrational thing.
But she wasn't actually part of the protest. I mean, she was on a bridge above the M25, a road bridge, not a gantry. She wasn't hanging off a gantry.
The question is, what was the explanation of the police for taking her? Why did they take her?
Well, they haven't given one.
No.
Well, that doesn't... Well...
And they've now said it was unreasonable and they shouldn't have done it. But it took them a whole 24 hours.
Well, they haven't even quite said that.
Good enough, does it?
But people don't do anything. They don't do anything unreasonable. It's something that someone made a decision about something. And that's what needs to be looked at. Someone decided something about her. It's not we just did it because...
Is it the sort of thing that the Home Secretary ought to pronounce
Well, you would think so.
Because, I mean, in a sense, there has to be a bit of political leadership.
I didn't understand why she didn't last night.
You would think so, because this is the press. This is the Fourth Estate. And to have the police cross that line is extremely serious, and we should take it seriously.
I mean, I don't think anyone should also give the impression that journalists should be immune from arrest. If they break the law, they should be arrested. But clearly, there was no breaking of the law.
She didn't break the law, and also she identified herself. She was working journalist. The police should have acted and released her immediately. The Home Secretary, as well as talking about people coming up in tiny boats, should also talk about the state of journalists doing their job. The police are not supposed to cross that line.
Right. Let's take another break now. We'll come to more of your questions in just a moment with Bonnie Greer, Kate Andrews, Chris Bryant and Bob Seeley. It's 8:45.
LBC. apply. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:48 on LBC. We have Bonnie Greer, Kate Andrews, Chris Bryant and Bob Seeley with us taking your calls. David is in Sheffield. Hello, David.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. The question is, has the majority of people who've taken their own lives in the last couple of years been men? Isn't it about time we had a minister for men and the two main parties started taking this issue seriously? I don't really care about men's lives.
That's a very personal question to me at the moment, because a friend of mine from university took his own life last Friday.
Sorry.
You sort of think, how could someone do that? But you can't put yourself in their position. And I think it's a really good question, because it's not just men, it's young men. I mean, the highest cause of death for men, I think it's under the age of 45, is suicide, which is horrific. And we don't talk about it enough, Chris.
And it always rises in a time of recession.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most immediate correlations, and that can't just be correlation, it must also be causation, I think. I think my mother took her own life as well. She was alcoholic, and when she died, many years ago now, but the Procurator Fiscal in Scotland rang and said it's a bit unclear whether she took her own life or she died, but because of the combination of paracetamol and alcohol, do you want me to investigate? And I said, well, there's no point in a way, because she'd been taking her own life for the last 20 years by drinking a bottle and a half of vodka every day. So and when I was a priest in the Church of England, I did a lot of suicide funerals, because we had a string of young kids at school took their own lives. And it's a very, very violent act. People forget, a lot of the emotions around it end up being of anger and fury and guilt, as well as sadness. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit, because I'm not sure that having a minister for men is the answer to this.
I do. I think it is.
Okay, go on then.
Go on.
I lost a friend to this as well. There is a statistic that says that almost the most dangerous person on earth is a lonely young man. We don't give men, I'm going to say we, and what I mean by that is society. There is an idea about what a man is, who a man is. That's one of the things we have to get past so that we can begin to help particularly young men. And I've worked with young men as a teacher, and it's very serious. You're absolutely right. But we do need a special minister to look at this. But we have to get past the idea of what a man is in terms of how they're supposed to present themselves, what their posture is, how they address travail, what they do in the world. Once we deal with those things and are able to get past them, I think we will have a space of compassion, and we can do something like that.
So we do often create ministers for something if there is a particular crisis. I mean, Tracy Crouch became the Minister for Loneliness, which initially was ridiculed. But it was actually quite an important thing that she did in that job, I think. So, Bob, do you think that there is a case for a minister for men?
No, but I'm really fascinated to listen to what Bonnie and Chris were saying, and I suppose particularly it's what you think is the idea of a man in this society, and how you can help men be true to themselves and good in themselves as well, and moving beyond this sort of stereotype of the tough guy or whatever sort of nonsense. I mean, for me, that was slightly depressing, and it's going off at a bit of a tangent. We tend to talk about alpha males meaning as sort of an archetype. Actually, when most people talk about alpha males, they talk about selfish, sort of ego-driven, narcissistic-driven men, and for me, that is not an alpha male. An alpha male is somebody who is stronger than just an appearance of sort of machismo or an appearance of some sort of tough front. And actually, I think, I did a bunch of tours in the military, and in many ways, physical courage is much easier than sometimes moral or ethical courage for men, and emotional courage.
Kate?
I'm not... I would be perfectly fine with a Minister for Men position, but I wonder, to your point, Iain, you said we create these positions when something's needed and we need to address it. But I think sometimes we also create these positions, and I would add Minister for Women in this as well. And it's acting as if you're doing something when you're really not.
But can you imagine if Rishi Sunak announced tomorrow that they were abolishing the position of Minister for Women?
Well, I mean, I'd applaud that. Maybe I'd be one of 3 people who would. But I think a lot of the stuff that they end up doing does not actually get to the heart of what women need in 2022. And I wonder, rather than establishing the Minister for Men, if what we really need is easier mental health treatment and access.
Do we?
And
That is
okay. When you've got an equalities minister, does that need to include men as well?
Yeah, well, it does. It's certainly meant to. I don't think we have.
I've never assumed it did.
A Minister for Women. We have a Minister for Women and Equalities, don't we?
Yes, we do. But the point is that these jobs do not. But these. It's great to talk about these jobs. It's very important to talk about these issues. But ultimately, people need to be able to seek help. And at the moment, with the wait list for mental health services on the NHS being over a year, that to me is where we should be putting in the resources and the effort.
I think we need something. I taught once a class of young white working class men, boys. I taught them Shakespeare. These guys did the best first soliloquy of Hamlet I have ever heard. And even when I think about them now, it makes me cry. These guys, their life choice was to be put into a kind of idea of what they were supposed to be and who they were supposed to be. And I had a room full of poets. I don't know where those guys are. I don't know what happened to them. But somebody should have been available to receive them so that the thing that they developed with me and other teachers could go on. If that's called a ministry for men, I'm fine with that.
One of the things I really worry about if there are cuts to public services is that local authorities will get rid of all their youth service provision, because it's not mandated. The council doesn't have to provide it. It's one of the things that will go very quickly. If we're talking about young men, many of them may have grown up in a household where there's no good male role model, or no male role model at all, and sometimes those alternative patterns outside school of other forms of social interaction, I think, are really, really important. So I agree with you about mental health as well. We don't train enough people in this country. Apart from anything else, we've now got 2,800 fewer GPs in England than we had in 2016.
But Chris, isn't that where families come in? I mean, look, on the Isle of Wight, we're lucky. We have this organisation called Youth Trust, which is really wonderful. But I mean, so much of this stuff shouldn't be about getting professional help. Most of it should be about having families and friends that support you, and that is different from going down the professional route.
I get that, but sometimes, as Bonnie's saying, you don't have a family, or you may have a dysfunctional family, I mean, sorry to bang on about this, but the highest incidence of young suicide is amongst young gay men.
Okay.
And that's because of bullying and because of being thrown out of their homes and things like that. And it's 6 times higher than it is for straight kids.
I live in a part of London, not far from here, and I see young men on the street, and they're in their 20s, and they've got nowhere to go. And you have to ask yourself, and I think you should, for everybody who's homeless, but for young people, you have to ask, what is going on? A lot of these people don't have families, or they've been kicked out of their families, or they've had to leave their families. And we have to make a society in which those young people, all people, have a chance to realize their potential. If that means a ministry for men, I'm for that.
Or they may have had a brain injury. This is one of the things that has been so kids from poorer backgrounds 4 times more likely to have had a major brain injury by the age of 5 and to have another, we don't know. And similarly, because we've not done, the research just hasn't been done, and we haven't got enough preventative measures in place. Lots of people who've been in the armed forces leave the armed forces. They may have had a brain injury. It's not been diagnosed. They've not been treated. Now, a significant number of people living on the streets are people who've been in the armed forces and have had a brain injury.
Some.
And 67% of people going into prison now are people who've had a brain injury. This is a whole world that hasn't even been touched, and it's a hidden epidemic.
Okay, well, what can we do about it? We're MPs.
Can I just say thank you so much? I think that the start is to Chris and Iain for sharing your stories, because actually it doesn't
Well, I
happen
think
all that
this is
often
one
that
of the
people get
last
personal.
great taboos in society.
Yes, it is.
Male rape is another one which doesn't get talked about a lot. And I think that virtually everyone has had contact with suicide at some point. Either people have had their own suicidal thoughts and have never told a single person about them. And I've had people ring into my programme before telling me that they've had these thoughts, and I'm the first person they've ever told, which sort of always knocks me out when people do that, because it's such a privilege to be in that position. And I'm not a trained mental health counsellor, but you're always worried that you're then going to say the wrong thing, and I think that is why people don't address it.
Another terrible statistic. I won't get the precise figure right, but if a child discovers their parent's body when their parent has taken their own life, the likelihood of them ending up in the criminal justice system is like in the 75, 80, 85%.
Makes perfect sense.
And also, I hate to say it, following suit.
And during lockdown, we lost a lot.
We're going to have an awkward gear change now. We go to our final fun text question. It's from Matt in Essex. Without promoting any of your own books, brackets, Ian, exclamation mark, close brackets, what's your current favourite political book? Bob Seeley.
I'm reading Winston Churchill's My Early Life.
Are you?
And it is actually a very, very good book.
Does it stand the test of time in the writing style?
It has, yes. He's not as tight as George Orwell in his writing style, but it's very readable, and you imagine the cadence is what one imagines, without doing some silly faux Churchill accent. The cadence and the pacing is what one imagines sort of Churchill. This sort of Churchill phrasing. Okay. It's a great book, and I recommend it.
Kate Andrews.
I want to plug two books. I'm reading one right now, and I've pre-ordered the second. The one I'm reading right now is Andrew Doyle's new book on the New Puritans, and it's a really thoughtful look at cancel culture and the dangers of it. But I mean, it's done through a really sharp lens. Andrew Doyle's great, and I'm really looking forward to reading my colleagues, James Heels. He's co-authored with Harry Cole, Out of the Blue: The Rise and Fall of Liz Truss.
Bonnie Greer.
Well, I have to say, I admire all of you. You have time to read books. I have not been reading any book, except I've looked at a book called The Presidents, and it's in paperback, and it's very interesting because of the various essays.
How do you know Bonnie's got a chapter in it?
No, and I'm reading it because not myself. I want to read the other writers, and it's accessible chapters, and it's very good. You learn a lot about the U.S.
Guaranteed that you'll come back on the programme with us. Chris.
I'm going to be really stupid now because I know what the book is about, but I can't remember its title, and I can't remember who's written it. But it's about the rise of nationalism through the history of Russia, and in particular in relation to Ukraine. So the difference, I had no idea, for instance, that the Cossacks were originally, and the Hetmanate was...
Hetmanate,
absolutely.
First Republic.
That was Ukraine.
First Republic.
All of that is, and the difference between Red Rus, Great Rus, Small Rus,
and the Ukraine, the word, the Ukraine.
Exactly,
yes,
all of that. Anyway, so that's what I'm reading.
It's not Norman Davis, is it?
No, it's I can't remember.
Tweet it out.
It's in my
Sounds
bag.
great.
It's in my rucksack.
Well,
underneath my sweaty
something to
jacket.
gladden the cockles of all of your hearts. Karen has texted to say, one of the finest panels in a long time, Ian. Thank you for an interesting evening. So you've all done your jobs.
Thank
you will
you,
all be invited back.
Thank
Rewarded. Thank you very
Karen.
much. Rewarded.
With another copy of the President.
Exactly. Right, coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking about the fact that nurses are going to go on strike for the first time ever throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. Is it ever right for nurses to go on strike is a question we're going to ask. 0345 6060 973. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The Home Office have said freedom of the press is a cornerstone of democracy after an LBC reporter was arrested while covering a climate protest on the M25. Charlotte Lynch was handcuffed and detained yesterday. Hertfordshire police have admitted what happened was wrong. Andy Trotter is a former chief constable of British Transport Police. He's told LBC it shouldn't have happened.
Clearly, Charlotte should not have been arrested in these circumstances. She's carrying out a legitimate role as a journalist. And even if there was a need to speak to her, and I find it hard to see why, I can't see the necessity for arrest anyway. And I couldn't see why the custody officer at Stevenage would even accept her into custody.
Thousands of nurses in the UK will begin strike action before the end of the year in a row over pay. Royal College of Nursing members have voted for walkouts, which will only cover non-urgent care. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the pay rises being demanded aren't realistic.
We need a strong economy in order to pay for a strong healthcare system, and a demand of 17% is out of step with the economic circumstances that we face.
Russian troops are completely withdrawing from a key battleground in Ukraine. Generals say they're struggling to supply their forces in the city of Kherson and are pulling back. The area was originally captured when the conflict began in February. It's a significant retreat, and in a televised address, General Sergei Surovikin explains what happens next.
Comrade Defence Minister, having comprehensively assessed the current situation, it is proposed to take up defence along the left bank of the Dnieper River. I understand that this is a very difficult decision, but at the same time, we will preserve, most importantly, the lives of our servicemen.
And there are strikes on the tube tomorrow. A limited service will be running, and TfL are warning that some overground and DLR services could also see last-minute changes. In the city, the FTSE 100 is closed down 9 points at 72.96. The pound buys $1.14 and €1.13. LBC weather, rain for much of Scotland tonight, as well as parts of the north and west. Dry and clear in the south and east, lows of 9. Breezy in the far northwest tomorrow. Rain for northwest Scotland, but drier elsewhere and feeling mild. Highs of 16 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Josh Bancroft.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Very good evening to you. It's 9:05 on LBC. Are we heading for a winter of discontent? And you might be forgiven for thinking so, given the